Can you tell me a little bit about the study that you and your colleagues were looking at?
We looked at Latino reading scores in the United States from 2005 to 2015. So we were looking at the National Assessment for Educational Progress, which is known as the nation's report card. It's known as the nation's report card because the same tests have been given to all students across the United States since 1990, so it provides a common metric for academic progress over time. We look specifically at Latinos at 4th grade and at 8th grade to see how their progress was at the national level, at the state level, and at a few large districts when data were available.
And what trends did you find?
We saw 3 different findings. At the national level, the findings were very positive. We saw that Latinos in both 4th and 8th grade had gains of about a half a grade level. And these gains were seen for all of the measured subgroups. So those are Puerto Ricans, Cuban Americans, Mexican Americans, and other Hispanic or Latinos.
And those gains, again, were over that 10-year period?
Yes, from 2005 to 2015.
That's one of the findings. You said you saw a couple of other things as well?
Absolutely. At the state level, the findings are a bit more complicated and not as promising. So what we found was that only 1/3 of states saw improvements from 2005 to 2015 in grades 4th and 8th grade. We also saw that there was a very wide range between the states that were performing at the highest level and the states that were performing at the lowest level, about 2 grade levels.
What does that suggest?
There's a very wide variation, which suggests that we need to take a closer look to see what are some of the differences across states. Like, what are the states that are very high performing doing well? What are the states that are not performing as well? What can they improve on?
Can you tell me if it's a regional thing, if some of the states were together that weren't performing as well, or if there seems to be no real pattern to that?
There seems to be no real pattern to it, not across the region. There are a few states that are performing well, both at the 4th grade levels and then the 8th grade levels.
What does this say, first of all, to educators and to policymakers when you have some places where the reading scores are good and others not so good?
I think it's something that we need to continue to pay attention to. Every 1 in 4 children in the United States is Latino, so how Latinos do in reading and in school more generally is how the nation does. If Latinos are not doing well, the nation is not doing well. If Latinos are doing well, then the nation is doing well. We really need to pay attention and figure out how we can help this very diverse population succeed in reading and school more generally.
What does that suggest for you researchers? What would you suggest to parents?
I have 4 recommendations for parents. First, parents, talk to your children daily. Talking with your children helps them to have an ever-growing vocabulary, which makes it easier for them to read. And you can talk with them during daily activities, like during play or while you're at the grocery store. Point out fruit and talk about its color, its shape, where it comes from. These kind of conversations help children to learn about what you're talking about, the fruit, but also when you're in conversation with your children, you also use new words. So it's really important to talk to your children daily.
What about reading to kids? We hear a lot about that. Can you tell me a little bit more?
That was my next recommendation. Parents, read to your child no matter how young they are. Reading to children helps them to learn new words, and hearing them over and over helps them to know it. You can read to your children at home, or you can take them to a local library where you have access to many free books.
Are there any recommendations about best time to start reading to your child?
Start as young as 6 months old. And I know that seems really young, but you're developing so many practices around reading even at a very young age.
So it's not just a conversation in the home?
Yes, it's a conversation anywhere and all the time. You can talk to your children during daily activities. You can talk to your children during playtime. Just point out things, describe them, and also listen to your child as much as you're talking to your child. This exchange helps the child both learn new words and practice to use them.
So talking and reading.
Yes.
And then number 3?
My 3rd recommendation is for parents to seek and find partners. And this recommendation is for parents who have children in daycare and preschool and schools. Your child's caregiver or your child's teacher have the same goal, is to help your child learn to read and learn more generally. Seek and find those partners. It truly takes a village to raise a child. So my 4th recommendation is that for Latino families to remember that being bilingual is more and not less. So families who speak in English and Spanish should speak and read to your child in the language that's most dominant in either English or Spanish. So research finds that speaking to children in your native language in Spanish does not interfere with how children learn to speak in English in the United States.
If you come from a bilingual family, where do you start? Do you start with English? Do you start with Spanish? Do you do a little bit of both?
Start wherever you are. Use the language that you're most dominant in English or Spanish. The more you talk to your child, the more you're talking to your child. And knowing two languages can be beneficial for many ways. It can help with cognitive flexibility, which means that you can switch between two different thoughts or think about two things simultaneously, or it can also help with regulating emotions and behaviors, which is another benefit.
Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you think would be important to address?
I think that it's really important for parents to realize that they are the ones that are consistent in children's lives and they are their best children's advocates. Make sure, parents, that you're talking to your children, you're reading with your children, you're finding partners to help your children to learn and speaking in ways that you feel most comfortable with. Start where you are.
The measurements were 4th and 8th grade. Is that because that's when the national measurements take place?
That test is in 4th, 8th, and 12th grade. The reason why we focus on 4th grade is because this is a very pivotal time in children's education. At around the end of 3rd grade, there's a shift where children need to not only learn to read for reading's sake, but also they need to know to read to learn other subjects. So if they're struggling at the end of 3rd grade in reading, they'll have more difficulty learning other subjects and in later grades. In fact, by the beginning of 4th grade, reading scores can pretty accurately predict high school graduation rates.
So you were really talking about the critical years in development and in educational development.
Absolutely. And 8th grade is sort of a check-in before going into high school to see how children are faring over time.
Do you have any plans for follow-up? What would be the next logical step for you and your colleagues to look at?
The next logical step would be to look at the new data once they are released. One thing that I also note in the report is that the fact that Latinos are the largest English language learning group, I think it makes sense to dive more deeply into that and to see how Latinos who are English language learners fare in their own context, rather than having them grouped in all together and as one group.
If you had anything that you could say as a result of looking at the research, what would it be? What do those who make our rules and our laws need to consider?
Those who make our rules and laws should consider the variations across states. They're very wide. 2 reading level difference between the highest and lowest performing states is too wide of a range. We need to understand what context Latino children read best in. What are the states that are doing that we can use as lessons learned across the nation.
When you go through all of these numbers and you start to make sense of them, what stuck out in your mind as being really positive?
I was very happy to see at the national level there were increases about of a half a grade level, but we also saw that in a few large districts there were reading gains from 2005 to 2015. Some of those cities include Boston, New York, San Diego, Los Angeles, all of which serve a very large Hispanic population.
Talk to me a little bit about your background, Monica. Where did you get your undergraduate degrees, master's degree, advanced degrees?
I have my undergraduate degree from Temple University, and I got my master's and my PhD from University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
What is your PhD?
My PhD is in applied developmental psychology. I focus on family engagement among Latino families.